Thank you for attending our webinar today, and we have some really good content. We hope that you'll walk away with some new insights based on our discussions with our panelists today. My name is Ruth Beret. I am a principal consultant, QSA and PCI service line lead here at Sikich. All right, so a little bit about our panelists today. I'm very excited to have these folks with us. From Sikich, we have Thomas Freeman. Thomas is a director of offensive services here at Sikich. He has over 30 years of experience in IT management and really sort of helping companies understand and build best practice information security programs. He heads up our penetration testing team here. So we're really excited to have Thomas. We also have Larry Bodker. Larry is a senior consultant and a QSA also here at Sikich, many years in the industry, both on the IT side of things, penetration testing, and then obviously QSA work. And then we have Teresa Lamont, who's also a senior consultant and a QSA here at Sikich, years of experience in this work, some background also in IT and ASV. So really well-rounded panel here today. From J Scrambler, we have Gareth Boker with us. Gareth has over 30 years of experience with PCI, so spent time with an ASV company, several QSA companies, the PCI Security Standards Council, where he was a trainer, director of trainer, also helped with the information security and PCI compliance program. So lots of experience and a wealth of knowledge here amongst our panelists. So we're really excited to have these folks with us. So moving forward, talking a little bit about why we're here today and what we're going to talk about. I think everyone who's on the call is probably aware that March 31st of 2024, PCI 3.2.1 was retired and was replaced with PCI 4.0. That was effective March 31st of 2024. There were a number of controls that were best practice recommendations until April 1st of this year. So as of April 1st, PCI 4.0.1 is fully in effect and all requirements should be in place. Two of the very consequential requirements that came with PCI 4.0 are around payment page script security and really sort of moving the needle forward in terms of providing some real protections against e-skimming, which continues to be sort of a real area of weakness and breach in the when it comes to the protection of payment account data. So we have requirement 6.4.3 and requirement 11.6.1, which were all about providing some of those e-skimming protections. So we are at the point now where you should have your solutions in place. What's next? From our perspective, what's next is the monitoring and the evaluation of the effectiveness of whatever mechanisms you've put into place to provide the protections that those requirements are meant to provide. You really have two avenues there. You can either solution in-house, where you are doing things like using content security policy, sub-resource integrity, other solutions that you are configuring and maintaining yourselves. Or you can go the route of a third-party solution. There are some very good solutions out there that meet those PCI requirements for you. Jay Scrambler obviously having one of those solutions that they're going to share a little bit about with you later today. So you have these solutions in place. You really want to be aware of this phase that you're in, which is how effective are these controls? When you have a technical solution like CSPs and SRIs, for example, they have very specific protections that they provide you, but you also want to take a step back and think about, are there limitations to the solutions that we've put into place to meet these controls? And if you have those limitations, have you evaluated the risk that's posed by those limitations to make sure that your solution is giving you a level of risk that's acceptable to your organization? In addition to those potential technical considerations in terms of evaluating the effectiveness of the mechanisms that you've put into place to meet these two requirements, there are also some operational considerations. And those operational considerations may or may not sort of add to the risk that you have to consider in terms of making sure that you're properly maintaining those controls. Depending on how you've solutioned for them, those operational procedures may introduce a lot of manual effort on your part. And that overhead needs to be taken into consideration when you look at the overall risk of the solution that you've decided to implement to meet requirements 643 and 1161, the payment paid script security, security of HTTP and security headers. That's really what we're talking about. So our panelists today, we're going to have Thomas, who's going to talk to us about some of those technical considerations and using as an example CSPs and SRIs only because we have seen quite a number of clients who are using those mechanisms as their means of meeting these new requirements. Just to give you an idea of the kinds of things you can consider when you look at the effectiveness of whatever mechanism you've put into place. And then we'll have some conversation with Larry and Teresa, who will share with you some of those operational considerations. Once we've wrapped that up, then we're going to look at Jay Scrambler and talk to them. They're going to talk to you about their solution and how it eases the burden of both some of those technical considerations as well as those operational considerations. So jumping right in, I'd like to introduce Thomas and let Thomas talk to you a bit about some of those technical challenges.
Hey, thank you, Ruth. And hey, welcome everybody. I'm counted a pleasure to be able to share with you regarding these technical challenges. Just a little bit of background. I actually was an early adopter of CSP back around 2015 to 17 and began performing secure web hosting, provided that as a service to clients, and worked heavily with CSP during that time. So I have a familiarity with it from that angle. And then as the director of our penetration testing team, we do run into situations where we find clients have used a content security policy or a CSP that is overly broad or has other weaknesses with it. And so that's kind of where we're coming from when we talk through these. Really, the two areas that we see implemented the most with a kind of a roll your own version of this is the CSP and the SRI. With the CSP, content security policy, basically what you're doing is you're establishing a set of headers that will be used to direct the browsers and how they should properly function with the data. So your browser is going to read that header coming back from your server and then determine whether it will load certain JavaScript, whether it will allow a site to be iframed in another site. And it kind of provides a sandboxed environment for your data to reside in. You can use things like the content security policy to say you can only load JavaScript from these specific sites. So you can create an allow list and say JavaScript, CSS scripts, as well as other types of scripts and resources, iframes and others, can only be loaded from a specific list of allowed sites. The problem with that is many of our sites now rely upon third-party products. I just think of a common WordPress site. Many plugins in that WordPress site change, they update automatically by the third-party vendor, and then they oftentimes host their resources in multiple different sites. So after a few days, if you've got this allow list going, all of a sudden that plugin breaks. Now you have to go in and add more sites to your content security policy. It's a very manual process to identify what JavaScript is no longer loading because of a change. And now I have to go and manually add that new site to my allow list so that the JavaScript will load. A solution to that some clients will use is to provide like wildcard allowances. So they'll take something like a content delivery network, think of Cloudflare, Akamai, one of those CDNs, cloud delivery network. And in that, they'll just go ahead and say, allow anything from Akamai. Well, if you think for a minute, as an attacker, or a pen tester, I should say, I might host malicious code in Akamai myself. And then using an injection technique or some other type of weakness that we discover in the website, we can now inject our code into the site, and it's going to be allowed to run because it's coming from an allowed site, Akamai, for instance. So you no longer have the protection you thought you had because of an overly broad directive that's really saying anybody with access to this wildcard domain can now use it. And because that's a publicly usable domain, Cloudflare, Akamai, and others like it, AWS, Azure, those environments then become a means for an attacker to host their malicious code. Another way that it happens is that it's hard to block all inline JavaScript. And what we mean by that is JavaScript that's not loaded in the headers or in the upper body of the web page, but rather it's loaded kind of dynamically inside of the code as it's or the page as it's generated. So rather than loading an actual script, you have Java code or JavaScript that's literally right inside of the HTML code itself. And that script, if you allow it and it happens to be, somebody injects something in there, well, then it's automatically allowed. So you've bypassed all of your protections by allowing inline scripts. So you really need to block inline scripts, but that becomes very difficult. And with content security policies, it really doesn't have a solution to that. Content security policies also don't consider supply chain. So I may have a JavaScript that I'm allowing to be loaded from a trusted third-party vendor, but that third-party vendor may also have JavaScript that is loading in and dynamically building its packages such that the code is changing regularly. And now some malicious code is coming in through a supply chain through an allowed site. Really, CSP doesn't take that into account either. So the solution to that is to look at something like sub-resource integrity. And with sub-resource integrity, we pre-qualify each JavaScript before it's loaded. So what we have to do here is we actually generate a hash for that JavaScript. Then when we load the JavaScript from a trusted third-party vendor, we compare the hashes, and if they match, then we will allow that JavaScript to run. Now we run into multiple manual issues. If you are not hosting all the JavaScript yourself, then you're going to have to manually run a hash from a trusted site prior to every time it dynamically changes. So if there's a trusted party, you're either having to download snapshots of it and make your hashes and then load from your own site, which some third-party vendors are not going to allow that from a copyright issue. Otherwise, you're going to have to find some mechanism to work with that third-party vendor to get those hashes every time that the JavaScript is updated. Otherwise, you end up with out-of-date JavaScript. And so now you might have vulnerabilities that have been unpatched because your hashes don't match. And to ensure that your website works like you expect it to, you can't use the most recent JavaScript. You have to use an older version of the JavaScript that you have a hash for. So you can see how it begins to break crucial parts, doesn't give you warning, and it only works with the scripts. It doesn't take into account iframes or other solutions. Now, can you build a protective system using content security policies and SRIs? You can. It's going to require a lot of manual effort. It's probably going to require a real good partnership with your third-party vendors and a very limited scope of vendors so that you can build out a mechanism to compare hashes and to know exactly where the data is going to be loaded from so that you can specifically allow just those sites. And then you have to keep on top of all the changes to the content security policies as browser updates occur throughout the industry. So that's kind of the challenges that we see, and attackers are ready to take advantage of those. We are familiar with them. They've been around a long time. We know these weaknesses, and we do take advantage of them when we find them. If you have any questions, I'll be available at the end to answer those. But that's really kind of the challenges and the technical considerations that you need to take into account when you start to try to roll your own solution.
Mhm. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those insights, Thomas. And it's really important because I think when you are attempting to solution for any given control or requirement, you can really get caught up in the technical nitty-gritty of what protection it does provide you, and maybe not so much really take a look at what it's not going to provide you or what those limitations are, and then evaluate those limitations against your risk appetite and say, okay, this is too much risk or too little risk, but at least you've done the evaluation. And I think that's really something important, and it's a good place to be right now that solutions are in place. So thank you very much for sharing and giving some insight into what some of those considerations could be.
Sure. Let me give you one more, Ruth. I
Mhm.
apologize, but as you
Okay.
were talking and I'm thinking through it, I realized too that some clients may actually look at this and say, you know what, because of that, maybe the risk we'll accept is we're going to narrow this down and only use these on the payment pages, something like that. And so what they're doing is they're narrowing the scope of where they're going to use this. And the rest of the website, maybe where there's not payment processing going on, they think of it as less sensitive data. They're not going to use it there. And so what ends up happening is you narrow down the focus to just one area. However, we do see sites where once that code is injected and it's now being loaded from the site, it now has a safe location that it will continue to run when the iframe or the payment page is brought up. So it still becomes a concern. And you really need to think of the site as a holistic solution, not just your payment page. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding that. Really good information. So that sort of it gives you a view into what some of these technical considerations could be now that you're wanting to evaluate the effectiveness of whatever mechanism you've put into place to meet these requirements. But let's not forget there are operational considerations too. And depending on the complexity or the manual effort that's involved with some of these operational considerations, it could be significant. And, we're really going to have an opportunity to have Larry and Teresa share some of those with you because they could easily fall through the cracks and end up sort of in a situation where you're being assessed by your QSA or you're completing your SAQ for this year's assessment and you realize, oh, we may not have covered all of those bases. Or you may uncover that as you're evaluating the effectiveness of the controls that you've put into place and making sure that the processes and the policies are in line to account for some of the additional things that you'll need to do related to these requirements. So I'd like to start off with Larry, if you could share some of your thoughts in terms of some of the operational considerations that we're talking about here.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Thomas, for starting it off. And I think a lot of what Thomas has stated leads into making sure your documentation is up to date, no matter which way you go, whether you use automated, manual, or a hybrid approach to your controls around secure scripts and secure web pages. Making sure your documentation, your secure application development policy, making sure that's up to date as far as what those controls are. For example, in that secure application development policy or the SDLC, the system development lifecycle policy, making sure you identify all that Thomas was saying, put that in writing if you're going to go the manual route, or identify what your technology controls are going to be as far as if you do have a solution. In that policy, you're also going to want to identify who's responsible for what, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the RACI matrix a little bit here. But who's going to do all these things? Is it your developers? Is it your security team that's going to implement the controls, or is it your third party that you're going to rely on to do that? You'll want to see their documentation as far as the secure application development policy goes. Another thing you're going to make sure of is who keeps it up to date. As Thomas was saying on the if you're using the CSP or SRI, it's going to have to be updated a lot, most likely. And if you're doing that, making sure you identify who's going to keep that updated, who's maintaining the inventory. When you have the inventory, if you're using the manual process, again, going to take a little more work to do the inventory versus if you're doing an automated solution. And then finally, what are those scripts doing? Identifying the activities of those scripts. What are they accessing? Are they accessing sensitive data? Are they accessing cardholder data? Are the scripts just just in the are there scripts that don't impact the payment page? Those are the kind of things you have to think about for all your scripts in that inventory. And then finally, how often are those scripts and web pages going to be evaluated to make sure they're secure? So that's just your application development policy. Then you're talking about change management too. You want to make sure that the change management policy is up to date as well. For, as Thomas was saying, when the changes are made, who authorizes those changes? When are those changes going to be made? Who's updating the documentation when those changes are made? When the changes occur, are there alerts for when the changes occur? Just like when you do patch management and you get alerts in your patch management system, most likely for your normal changes or your standard changes. You want to make sure that's part of your script changes as well for change management, to be alerted when the known changes occur or when there's suspicious changes that occur. You'll want to be notified as far your change management goes. And then finally, another document that we're encouraging you to make sure is up to date is your incident response plan. When those changes occur and who's being notified of those changes, who's taking action when your scripts change. In your incident response plan, do you have playbooks, especially for your payment pages changes or alerts from your either your automated again system or your manual, and you're getting alerts? What does your playbook say about what you're doing for tasks that you're going to handle when that comes your way, as far as the known or unknown changes occur? Then finally, on the incident response plan that we're helping with clients on is, are you training your team on how to identify when payment pages change and what happens when those payment changes change? Are you training folks how to, for example, a tabletop exercise? Are you doing tabletop exercises specifically for payment pages, or are you doing red team, blue team exercises for when when you're doing activities to train your team on those changes? So a lot of documentation needs to be at least thought about or updated. Again, secure application development policies, change management policies, and then incident response plan. Along with that, not just the policies, but the RACI matrix, the responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, or the responsibility matrix. If you're using third parties, what are they responsible for, and what is your team responsible for? Who developers are the developers responsible for ensuring the security of the scripts, or is that the security team that's responsible for validating and ensuring the security of the scripts and payment pages? Or the third party, like I talked about, or DevSecOps, development, security, and operations. Who's all involved in all the tasks that have to be done? That is where you'll update your RACI matrix or your responsibility matrix to clearly identify who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, and all the activities associated with the payment pages. And then finally, your targeted risk analysis. It used to be you're doing a risk analysis once a year. You're still most likely, for best practices, will still want to do that. But with as Ruth was saying, with April 1st of 2025, now you're needing to do the targeted risk analysis for anything that pretty much has a frequency associated with it or a periodicity associated with it, however often you're doing it. For example, for the payment pages and the scripts in 1161D, the default for that frequency is once a week or once every 7 days for ensuring that your scripts are monitored and actions taken to ensure that changes that are occurring on the scripts are being validated at least once a week. That's the default. But if you have a targeted risk analysis that says your frequency is going to be, if you're doing automated workflow, your frequency may go longer. Maybe you'll say every quarter we're going to do, penetration tests to validate our scripts and payment pages because we have an automated tool. Or, on your targeted risk analysis, again, you're saying what are the risk and likelihoods associated with if we're using a manual control versus an automated. What are the risks associated and what are the risk factors for the likelihood and the probability that something would occur? For example, if you're near real time or at real time as far as being notified when the scripts changes, that could lessen your requirement to do that to do the validation more often. That's where again you can do your quarterlies, your biannual or your annual penetration testing to validate your scripts. So really, what I is important here is just updating all your documentation to ensure you include the new requirements for 1161 and 643 around policies, targeted risk analysis, and then the RACI responsibility matrix. Teresa, do you want to emphasize a little bit more on that?
Thanks, Larry. Yes, I will try to concentrate more on the how. And thank you for taking us through like the who, right, is going to be doing all these. So, there's a lot of additional considerations here and questions I'm going to kind of try to provoke your thought around on how you will complete the inventory, that authorization, and the monitoring. because no matter what your technical solution, you're still on the hook for managing your internal operational framework for these requirements, and that can be a lot of work. So first up, starting with the inventory, we have to make sure that you are creating that inventory of your scripts. If your environment only uses 1 or 2 scripts, that might be very manageable, but today's modern websites can have dozens, if not hundreds of scripts, including those from tag managers, analytical tools, CDNs, third-party ad trackers, marketing widgets, and more. So how do you even start building that inventory? What is the tool or process that you're going to use, and how are you going to make sure it's complete? You could use a synthetic user, or with a headless browser, and crawl your site, or partner with a third-party service provider for helping identify them. But with today's websites, they're very dynamic, and you have to try to figure out how to do all of the user actions to make sure you're capturing all of those different scripts that you would encounter or could possibly encounter. And it's difficult to make sure that you're finding them all. And like, say you get that done, you have your baseline. How are you going to keep that current? What's those scripts can change constantly, weekly, daily, and some come from those internal teams and others from the third-party sources. And like Thomas and Larry said, those third-party sources aren't going to tell you when they've been updated. And if you're using that SRI, CSP, you might have a broken website, and that's not what you want. So you have to figure out how often you're going to verify your inventory, how are you going to track any of these changes? And, PCI stipulates that you're doing this at least every 7 days, or as determined by your targeted risk analysis. So that's definitely something you have to work through, is how often you're going to go through this process. And and I guess the one thing I want to say, the longer that you leave between these checks, the harder it's going to be to figure out what has changed, why it's changed, when it changed. So in my opinion, the more often you're able to check it, the better it's going to be. And even with some kind of tooling in place, you're still responsible for maintaining this accurate inventory that's justified and authorized with all of your scripts. And during an assessment, you'll need to be able to demonstrate that this process is defined, documented, and working. Those QSAs out there are pretty tough sometimes. So moving along to our authorization and change control considerations, let's say you've got your baseline inventory in hand, and now you want to focus on, how to manage those changes and approve those scripts. You likely need at least 2 different processes, one for the first party scripts, the ones that you control, that you can weave into your software lifecycle and CI/CD pipeline. And then you're going to need probably at least one other process for those third-party scripts that will probably tend on that post-authorization side. So, there's scripts that the marketing team or analytics teams are going to try to put on that website, and how are they going to alert you that they've added them? You might find them as after that they've been added, and have to be able to deal with those and get them added into your tooling. So you'll need to ask, like, have those scripts been reviewed and approved before deployment? Will you be able to catch all of them? How will you be able to catch all of them? You know, who's going to update that inventory? Is it going to be part of that change control process? Or does somebody have to go through those change control tickets afterwards to try to pull those scripts out and get them added to the inventory? And, you know, who's going to review those third-party scripts for changes that might be outside that formal change control process? And then the trickiest one here is, what if the script changes just slightly, but maybe the purpose stays the same? Do you just reauthorize it? You know, do you have a way to reevaluate the behavior of that script to see if the it's become risky? You know, it's hard to tell, right? Unless somebody's actually checking what that script does. So all of these decisions on how you're going to do these things will need to be documented. And without that clear ownership that Larry's talking about and streamlined workflows, you risk approval fatigue. And if your team is constantly reapproving scripts that have changed just in only minor ways, maybe the script does the same thing, but the hash has changed, they're going to start to overlook what really matters. So finally, with monitoring and alerting, we've mostly focused on the scripts, but in 11.6.1, don't forget about the security impacting HTTP headers, like the HSTS and the X-frame options and cores and secure and HTTP only cookie flags. These headers aren't visible on the page, but they play a critical role in securing how that content is rendered in the browser. And the purpose and challenge here is what your server sends is not maybe what the consumer's browser receives. And the attackers can alter those headers in transit or inject malicious content and compromise the security of that data. So static checks of the server responses aren't enough. You need some sort of monitoring that shows you where or what that browser is actually receiving. And so questions here to ask your team: how are you going to monitor? How often? Is it a manual process? Will you need to make sure that that it's repeatable and that you know what is supposed to be there? And what happens when there is an alert? Is this built into that IR plan that Larry is talking about? How do you handle these? And how are you going to document and retain this evidence and capture what has happened? So kind of in closing here, how do you prove that your solution and your controls are still working? And you can find tools and different ways of technical solutions of dealing with this. But the important thing is to remember that it's on you, that at the end of the day, whether you're completing a self-assessment questionnaire or preparing for a full report on compliance, you'll need to show that you have these policies and processes in place and that they're effective. And a third party can definitely help ease with that technical lift, but you still own those processes and the outcomes.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
so
Thank
a
you so much,
mouthful. Thank
Teresa.
you.
That's it's a lot of really good information. And when you really piece together everything we've talked about so far today, looking at the technical aspects of how you've solutioned for these two requirements and what the limitations may be and whether or not that risk is acceptable to you. Then you factor in these operational considerations, all the policies and procedures, and injecting considerations for these controls into your existing change control and approval and authorization processes and incident response and logging and monitoring, and what will alerts look like in your monitoring systems when these changes take place. A breakdown at any point along the way as you're evaluating the effectiveness may cause you to make more changes to how you're meeting these controls or how you've implemented the operational processes around maintaining them. So it, depending on the complexity of your environment, it really could be quite a lot of work and a lot of overhead and perhaps resources that you didn't plan on expending along the lines of maintaining these requirements. So, there's always a decision point. At some point, absolutely fine doing things in-house and you've got it under control, or you may say, what's out there? What solutions are out there that can take some of this load off of our shoulders and really sort of ease that burden for us? And there are a number of solutions, and there are solutions out there that are purpose-built to meet these particular requirements for PCI. So at this point, I'd really like for Gareth to take over and talk to you a little bit about what JScrambler has to offer in terms of meeting these controls and how that can ease some of those technical and operational burdens for you.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, that was very interesting there, very insightful in terms of some of the issues that exist out there. So let me just bring up a screen share. There we go. So hopefully you can all see my web browser right now. What I'm going to show today is what we call web page integrity. It's a solution that JScrambler has developed, and we have a PCI DSS module within it that is very much focused on the requirements that we've been talking about today, requirement 643 and 1161. There are two different ways of implementing our solution. One is working in what we call agentless mode. This is a scanner. It's similar, but slightly different to what you might be familiar with ASV scans. So we will run our solution against your payment pages and look at the JavaScript that's running on there. I think Teresa talked a little bit about the behaviors of JavaScript, and that's exactly what we focus on. We're not looking at whether a JavaScript file has changed or not. Obviously, that's one factor of this. But what we're actually looking at is the behavior of that JavaScript. What is the JavaScript actually doing? Where is it connecting to? What is it doing on the page, and so on? And that allows us to see not just the fact that something has changed, but we can actually tell you exactly what that script is doing. And that then gives you a lot of good information. It gives you the insight that you need to be able to determine whether that script change is something that you should authorize or not. So as I said, there's two different ways of running. One is the agentless scanner method, and the other is what we call our agent. This is an HTML tag that you add into your site, into your payment page, and then it will monitor that page within the consumer's web browser. The difference between these is that, as well as when the agentless is running, this is something that goes from our site, connects to your site, and this is run periodically. So what that means is we're running by default once every week. Again, that ties into requirement 1161. Or alternatively, if you've done a TRA and you've picked a different time period for that, then that's something that we can configure on our side, and we'll just run at whatever frequency you like. With the agent, that is running essentially continuously within the customer's web browser. Anytime somebody is on that payment page, it's running, it's able to send telemetry back in terms of those behaviors. And as soon as something changes, we'll very quickly pick up on that change and be able to provide an alert. So it's a much quicker way. It goes above and beyond what's required for PCI DSS. But from a security perspective, having that immediate insight, that immediate knowledge that something has changed is obviously very useful. And one final thing that I want to mention as well, with the agent, because it's running within the consumer's web browser, it allows us to go, again, above and beyond what's required for PCI DSS. And with what we call our Ultra plan, we also have the ability to block certain behaviors of other third-party scripts. So what I'm going to do today is I'll show a very quick demo. We've got an e-commerce site here, J Scrambler Shoes. We'll see two changes within this. One is the addition of some new JavaScript. In this case, we've just added Stripe into the payment page, and we'll see the process of authorizing that. And the second thing we'll do is we'll see a malicious change. We're running something called Full Story within this. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's an analytics package, very similar to Google Analytics and many others that are out there. But we've changed this package to actually add a web skimmer into the payment page. So it's very, very difficult to spot this as a consumer who would be using this page, but web page integrity will detect this, and we'll see how that works. So as I mentioned, it's a very simple e-commerce site selling rather overpriced trainers or sneakers here. I've already got some picked out. So if we just go to the checkout page, and we don't need to fill in any of these details, given that it's just a demo, we'll go straight to the payment page. And you can see here that there's a red box around our payment form. So this is an iframe that's being loaded. And the red box here is something that we've added to our skimmer. It's to give you a visual indication that there's a skimmer running. Now, in a real world attack, attackers don't do this. What they would do is they'd make that payment page look as similar, if not identical, to the original payment page that's there. But like I say, we've just added that red box there to give us all a visual indication that there's a skimmer that's running in the page. So if I go through and I make a payment, I click confirm, wait a second, and there we are, that's gone through. So as a customer, that was nice and easy. I've got my order number. My sneakers will hopefully be turning up very shortly. J Scrambler Shoes has obviously received that order, but at the same time, the attacker has managed to capture that data and they've exfiltrated it. They've sent it off to a third-party website. So if we go into the back-end dashboard now, I just want to show you what we see. So this is the PCI DSS module here, and this is our overview page. You can see that we've got a number of different vendor services. This is how we group together the JavaScript libraries within requirement 643. So we group things together into vendors. This means that, let's take Google Tag Manager as an example. That generally loads two different JavaScript files into the page. And rather than considering them as two different JavaScripts, we know they're both coming from Tag Manager, so we put those together. And we can also name them, we can categorize them, and so on. We can see that we've got a number of them that are already authorized. There's 11, and we've got two vendors that are in this needs review state. So that's Stripe, as I mentioned, and Full Story. We've also been a little bit lax with our HTTP headers review as well. So we've actually got 6 HTTP headers here that need to be reviewed too. You can also see here that there's a potential skimmer that's been found. So we analyze all of the JavaScript that's running as well, and we're looking for any signs of Magecart attacks. So if we detect that, we'll also inform you through here. And finally, for the QSA, so for Sikich here, there's a nice little section here for evidence for assessment. It's an export that you can do. It gives you a CSV of all of the vendor services, who authorized it, when they authorized it, what the justification was, all of that information that a QSA needs to be able to validate that you've been doing everything that you need to do for requirement 643 and 1161. Right, so if we jump into the vendor services quickly, we look at Stripe here. We can see it's been first seen today. Like I said, it's just been added into our payment page, and you can see that it's in this needs review state. If we go into the details and dive in here, we can see exactly what's going on. So we can see that there's an iframe. I'll jump around a little bit here. So there's an iframe that's loaded from Stripe. That iframe contains this information for payment card details, and there's a network transfer here that sends the data to Stripe. This is everything that we would expect if you were thinking about how an authorization would normally happen. Load an iframe, capture the cardholder data, send it off for authorization. For the purposes of this demo, this is everything that we're going to look at for the authorization. But obviously, as you just heard, there's a lot more that goes into this to make sure that everything that you're seeing here is actually what you're expecting before you can do the authorization. So let's authorize this. Because this is one that we already recognize, you can see we've actually got a pre-written justification here, which you can, of course, turn off and write your own, but we'll stick with the defaults just for now. We have a few different permissions here. So as I mentioned, we're looking at the behavior of JavaScript, not the fact that the JavaScript has changed necessarily, but whether the behavior of the JavaScript has changed. There were 3 different types of behavior that we detected. As we saw, that network transfer to js.stripe.com, the iframe that was loaded from js.stripe.com, and also the access of form data within that iframe. There's a few different permissions that we can set. We can allow the observed networking, that is specifically what we just saw there. We can allow all, which means that we trust that script implicitly. Sometimes we see people using this for first-party JavaScript, where they have a completely different process for authorizing the JavaScript. But generally, we would recommend that you use only allowing the observed behavior. That means that you'll still get an alert if there is a change. And the final one here is blocking all of that behavior. And I'll show that when we get on to full story in just a moment. So for now, we're just going to stick with these defaults, allow only the observed behavior for all of these. We've got our justification here. We hit save, and that's it. That's done. Jumping on to full story now, you can see here there's a potential skimmer. It's being very loud about the fact there's a potential skimmer, so you're not going to miss this. If we go into the details, this is slightly different to what we just looked at with Stripe. You can see this was actually first seen about 9 days ago. And if we look at the history, you can see exactly what's happened. You can see that it was first detected on the 31st of August. John F. authorized it 1 day later, and it went from this needs review state into authorized. And then you can see 3 days ago that web page integrity detected a change in full story. And so at that point, it will have changed that state from authorized back into needs review. It will send out an alert at that point, and then this is now what we're doing. We're coming in, we're reviewing this, and we're able to either authorize it or potentially take a different action. So if we look at the behaviors again here now, and we look at the details, we can see what's going on. We can filter it to just see what's changed since John F. did his authorizations a few days ago. And you can see, first of all, there's a network transfer to maliciousAPI.thirdpartydomain.net. Now, attackers are not normally this obvious. This is just where the attacker is sending that third-party data out to. So this is the exfiltration. So at this point, if you've looked at this and you're seeing that there's a suspicious domain in here, you'd probably be thinking about your incident response plan. Do we need to kick this off? So let's have a look further down now. We can see there's an iframe as well that's being loaded here. Not necessarily something that we'd expect from an analytics package. And then if we look at the form data that it's accessing here, you can see that our analytics package is now accessing the cardholder's name, the card number, the security code, and the expiration. It's also accessing the city for some reason as well. So we know full story should not be accessing this. We know it is accessing this. And so, as I said, you'd probably be kicking off your incident response plan at this point. But as I mentioned, we do have this nice feature of being able to block behaviors. And so whilst that incident response plan is underway, whilst you're rolling your site back into a known good state, we can actually go through and we can use this blocking capability. So as I mentioned, we have this recommendation engine. It knows that there's a potential skimmer that's been found here. And so it defaults to suggesting that we block all of these actions. So the network transfer here to maliciousAPI.thirdpartydomain.net, that will be blocked. Accessing the form data, accessing the PAN, the cardholder's name, and so on. All of that cardholder data access is going to be blocked. And finally here for the iframe, being able to load that malicious iframe. What it's actually doing is it's an overlay attack over the top of the original iframe. And we're going to block that from taking place as well. So if we hit save now, I had a horrible feeling. I've been talking just a little bit too long, so I've actually been logged out. So if I just log back in here, Oh, no, I'm all good. Right. If we authorize this now, we've got all those blocks set. We hit save, and that's now updated. Now, it's not rolled that out yet. You can see here it says that there's one vendor service with changes in ready to apply. And if we hit apply, what it's going to do now is it's going to rebuild that agent. It's going to take the rules that we've just set, any other rules that have been set beforehand, it packages it up into this agent and it deploys it to the CDN. It also hardens that script, it obfuscates it. There's a number of other techniques that we use to protect that agent. But as you can see, that's already been deployed now in 7 or 8 seconds. That is now live. So that's there, able to protect your customers. It means that you've still got that malicious code on your site, but it's being prevented from accessing that data and so on. So just to show that in place, we go back through now. Again, we've got our items in our cart. We can go to the payment page here, and you can see now that that red box that was there before, that has all gone. That's because at this point, web page integrity is preventing that hacked version of full story from loading that iframe. If we go through and we fill in our cardholder details, web page integrity now is preventing that malicious script from accessing any of this data. And if we click on make a payment, it would also be preventing that malicious script from sending any of that data out to maliciousAPI.thirdpartydomain.net. So that order again has gone through as a customer. I'm happy. J Scrambler Shoes has received that order. Their incident response plan is probably still going on to get the website back, but they've been able to take an order and prevent the attacker from getting hold of any of that data. So that's the vendor services part of it. I'll very, very quickly show the headers, but it's very similar to what you've just seen. You can see these are the headers that we've just seen on the website. These are the ones that are set, and the process is very similar. We can go in and review, and we can either authorize it or discard it. Authorize is generally what you want. That means this is the header that we're expecting, and that's all good. So you hit save, and that's everything that you need to do. For requirement 643, it requires a justification. For headers, it doesn't require that justification, and so we don't ask you about it on here. And you can simply go through for all of your other headers here, validate that that header is correct, and then, like I say, simply set that. And of course, we support multi-line headers and so on and so forth as well. Very, very quickly, we also support a number of different integrations to be able to get you those alerts, whether it's email, messages to Slack or to Jira, opening tickets and so on. And most people use our webhooks to get it into a log management server, a SIM, or whatever it is that you're using. So there are a number of different integrations that are available here. So as you can see, it's a very powerful system. It is designed to make your job a lot easier. It allows everything to work, unlike something like CSP, which will often prevent that script from running until you update the policy or you update the sub-resource integrity hashes that you have. So it makes everything much, much easier. Because we're based on behavior rather than changes, it reduces the number of authorizations that you need to do as well. So that is web page integrity.
Awesome.
So with that, I'll come back to you, Ruth.
Thank you very much. And you can easily see a lot of the not just the technical considerations that Thomas spoke to, but the operational considerations, things like, roles and responsibilities. How are you going to have a mechanism to capture when changes are happening and authorize them and add business justification and easily be able to show that there's an inventory of your payment page scripts and any, third party, fourth party, nth party scripts that are also a part of what's happening in those payment pages. But the determination of, okay, something's changed. Is it malicious or is it not malicious? There can be some time spent in determining that, depending on how you solution for these requirements. And, being able to know if something is malicious and then move right to the stage where you're taking action on that and getting that protection in place. You've got alerting so that folks are getting notified right away. You don't have to sort of figure out how is an alert going to be generated. It answers those questions for you. And it really helps you get to the incident response piece of it, where you already know that something's happened, you find out about it rather quickly, you're able to take action. Just about every organization has emergency change control procedures where you're able to take an action like blocking. As Gareth was showing us, you're able to take that blocking action right away and then follow up with your change control documentation, your incident response documentation. An incident has occurred, we resolved it. You've got the history of what happened that's available to you through the tool. So, there are a lot of processes that you can shortcut and that you can leverage a tool like this to be able to reduce that burden on your internal staff. So at the end of the day, PCI is about documentation, what you're doing, how you're doing it, getting controls in place, evaluating, making sure they're working for you. Are they effective? PCI 4.0 has taken a huge shift into placing a lot of emphasis on business as usual, on risk-based approach, and that constant reevaluation of the effectiveness of what you're doing, so that you're not just kind of checking boxes, you're truly implementing security in a way that protects you and protects your customers who trust you with their data. So thank you to everyone, and we hope everyone has a great rest of the day.